Anaika joins me now. Kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Morning, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
And I understand in your spare time you've also been out on the streets as part of the Red Shield appeal and getting, an encouraging response from some of the people you've met.
Yeah, it's always Red Shield Appeal Week because there's always such a rewarding time to be able to stand out there with the buckets because we come across so many families and so many people who have been touched by the Salvation Army. Their lives have been touched by the work of the Army, either through the churches or through our services. And so they always stop and tell us their stories, and they're super grateful. And I kind of feel like a fraud because they're thanking me for work that I never did. But because they know that the Salvation Army was there for their parents or
Yeah,
was there for an uncle or a brother, and so they're just really grateful. And then they stop and tell us their stories,
yeah.
and they're often saying thank you. But I kind of feel bad because I'm like, oh, but I wasn't there, but because they remember it's the army that was there, and so I
Exactly.
always feel really grateful to take their stories, and I'm really encouraged to be working for the army and I guess the history and legacy we have.
And honestly, you are part of what happens. And this is what I love. The Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit, over 20 years in operation now. And for you guys in the work that you do, you're the fence at the top of the cliff. And the Salvation Army does such brilliant work for people whose lives are broken through a range of different circumstances, many of them outside of their control, of helping people to pick up the pieces. But for you guys, you're at the top of the cliff. You're talking to the politicians and having conversations along the lines of, no, that's an absolutely stupid policy and it won't work. I'm sure you're much more tactful than I am in that
Yeah.
regard, but that is essentially the work that you do. And because of that work, as I say, over 2 decades that's been in operation now, influencing and changing the policies that our country have, which is preventing some of the tragedies that unfortunately we see daily, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I always sort of look at our work as a bit of a slow burn, whereas for our frontline staff, they're able to see those tangible differences straight away. But just also reminded that, our frontline staff, they make a significant difference, for a small amount of people. But I guess when it comes to policy, we make a small difference that impacts a significant amount
Yeah.
of people, for society in general. And so we kind of need both ends.
And both, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And,
yeah.
and and that false dichotomy of saying, hey, ambulance at the bottom or fence at the top, Salvation Army says, why not both? Just before we go any further, though, Red Shield appeal, there's people on the street with buckets, but for people listening at the moment, how can they be involved with that? And I'm sure there's many stories from Rhema listeners as well of saying, hey, yeah, I remember this one time, really love the work of the Salvation Army. Thanks for the reminder, it's Red Shield appeal. How do I give? What would you say to encourage people to do that, and how can they be involved?
Yeah, I think if you jump on our website, salvationarmy.org.nz, and you can donate there. But it's a cost of living crisis. And
Yeah,
so, if you've got a couple of hours and you want to volunteer at your local food bank or your local family store or pop down to your local centre, we love hearing those stories of how you've crossed paths with the Salvation Army in some shape or form. It's really encouraging for us to continue, I guess, that ambulance at the bottom of the cliff
yeah.
sort of fight. And whether it's time or whether it's finances, we're really grateful.
Now, back to the top of the cliff, if we may, and the important work that you do, and today focusing in on our prison system and some perhaps concerning comments from Corrections Minister Mark Mitchell about wanting to have longer sentences for people. Let's lock them up and let's lock them up for longer. Let's put some context around this. What actually was the minister saying here?
Yeah, I think that the minister had given a direction to corrections to have a look into the research around longer sentences because they prevent, I guess they provide more rehabilitation efforts for if you're in prison for longer periods of time.
Yep.
And so at the moment, it's not a policy, it's just a sort of a directive as to look into the possibilities in that space. But I think we're quite vocal because we are in the reintegration space and helping people coming out of prison and in that prison system overall. And so we sort of know what works. And when you do look at the recidivism rates, longer sentences do bring down. So recidivism recidivism rate is the rate to which you'll reoffend or that you'll
Okay.
be re-imprisoned. And so recidivism rates are lower for longer sentences, but it's not that simple. Like it's
Mm.
lower if you're older, it's lower if you have a particular offense,
Yeah.
like it's lower if you're not gang affiliated, and so it's not necessarily only because it's been a longer prison sentence. There's a whole other myriad of factors in there as well that's affecting those recidivism rates. But I think our focus is on those comments is around that rehabilitation.
Yep.
I think we've always advocated for better rehabilitation and support and reintegration for those that are in the prison system, which unfortunately for us on the front line, we think it's significantly lacking in that space.
Yeah, and certainly in some ways it's encouraging that the minister is doing some research here. He's not just engaging with a policy. He's asking some questions. He's asking people to do the research. Having said that, at the Social Policy Unit, you've done your research as well. You're able to add to that conversation, and certainly in terms of long-term offending, longer sentences don't necessarily mean better results. Being tough on crime by locking people up and throwing away the key doesn't necessarily result in less crime or safer communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the key catalyst in that, I guess that conversation that the minister is having is around the rehabilitation. And the reality is, corrections haven't been able to put a lot of rehabilitation programs in place, according to their latest annual report, and that's because they're struggling in regards to staffing,
Yep.
and so in regards to capacity and capability. But ultimately, it's about investing in rehabilitation and also reintegration because we're in that space. Andrew, if I can just explain how much of a difference reintegration makes. I think currently, for those who come through reintegration and have a supportive accommodation,
Yep.
their chances of reoffending is significantly less. I think if I can just pull that number up, it's about 6% to be resentenced for
Okay.
those that
Wow.
come through supportive accommodation. Yeah, and for normally it's about 26%.
Gosh.
Yeah, 26% that are getting resentenced if they're just going out into the community. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But there's a significant difference when you're wrapping around people coming out of prison and providing them with those supports, providing them with things like ID, providing them with a place, a safe roof over their head,
Yep.
and providing them with the supports that they need so that they aren't, so that they do find their alternative life and they aren't reoffending
Yep.
again. And so I guess that's the key part that we're trying to push for is that it's not necessarily about the long sentences. It's about investing in rehabilitation and investing in reintegration and helping people get that alternative path when they come out of prison.
And now the budget just a couple of weeks away, and I'm sure the Social Policy Unit, you'll be watching carefully what the budget announcements are. But in some ways, for the minister, this is a way of saving money or reallocating money, because if people can be rehabilitated back into their communities, if there's less recidivism, as you say, there's less reoffending, then overall, having less people locked up will save the country money. If we can divert some of those funds into making sure that people are reconnected back into their communities to make better choices for their life going forward, I mean, that's a win for the community and it's a win for the government budgets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a win for society because, one of the key things that helps, those that we support back into the community is employment.
Yeah.
And so it's about giving them a purpose, giving them an opportunity to be giving back to giving back to society. And so not only does it give them a purpose, but it also helps them to reintegrate back into society and give back to the economy by employment. And so those are yeah. It's much better and safer for society if we're investing in rehabilitation and reintegration and providing those alternatives for those coming out of prison as opposed to just locking them up for longer periods of time.
Yeah, and as you say, the statistics, the research on this one, 6% versus 26%. That's some pretty clear numbers there. Anna, thank you so much for the work that you do, the vital work that you do at the top of the cliff. If people wanted to find out more about Red Shield, of course, salvationarmy.org.nz. Encourage people to go to that website to find out more, to prayerfully consider making a donation. But hey, thanks for being on the program today. Kia ora.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.